They traveled the world and came home to build their dream house. Chelsea Mansion in Muttontown is the dream house of Alexandra and Benjamin Moore. Designed by famous architects Delano and Aldrich and completed in 1924, this 40-room mansion was inspired by the architecture that the couple saw on their year-long honeymoon around the world.
Mrs. Moore started a journal, and in that journal was everything that she saw throughout the world that she wanted for her new country home that they were planning on building. They started in Europe and went all the way around the world. Their Chelsea Mansion is French, English, Art Deco, and Chinese.
Now, one of the most unique things about Chelsea Mansion is that it's the only Gold Coast mansion to have featured a real live moat surrounding the house.
Mrs. Moore and Benjamin Moore were on the upper Yangtze River. She looked up on a hill and saw a big white manor house with white body and black trim and shutters, fell in love with the design. It had a central courtyard and a moat going around two sides. And that moat was to keep the cattle in the courtyard. Mrs. Moore fell in love with that design, sketched it in her journal. When she came home, she handed her journal to the Society Architects of Delano and Aldrich, who also designed Ohika Castle, and decided she wanted her moat. And Delano and Aldrich fought with her constantly, but she got her moat. And surprisingly, our moat is lined with cobblestones that came from West 23rd Street, where the original Chelsea Mansion in New York City once stood.
The inside of the mansion is just as impressive, offering a rich cultural variety of different design work from around the world.
The dining room, we call it the Wellington dining room. The pine paneling in that room once belonged to the Duke of Wellington in England, the first Duke of Wellington, beat Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo. That is his paneling. Also found out from the Metropolitan Museum of Art that is an extinct species of pine, that pine no longer grows in England. The breakfast room is covered in French linen, hand-painted French linen, that Mrs. Moore rescued from a house being torn down in France. Another special feature are the Chinese, what we call the Chinese doors. We have two doors that came from the Summer Palace in Beijing. They were originally covered in a very heavy layer of gold, but the Chinese stripped the gold off the doors and sort of tossed them aside. Mrs. Moore, being such a great lover of art and architecture, was horrified, brought the doors, rescued them, and brought them here, and had Delano and Aldrich incorporate them into the design of the house. And then really the jewel of Chelsea is what we call the gallery, the Sert mural. The panels in the gallery were painted by Jose Maria Sert in 1924 in Paris. Mrs. Moore was a dear friend of Coco Chanel's, and so was Jose Sert. She met him, fell in love with his work, and hired him on the spot to create the mural that you see there. It's 85 feet long. There are 40 panels, covered in white gold and painted in sepia tones of a mythical Mediterranean village.
The Moore family lived in and owned the mansion for almost 60 years. Upon Mrs. Moore's death in 1983, it was willed to the county as a means of preserving it.
She started seeing a lot of her friends' houses being torn down. Did not want anything to happen to Chelsea. She started donating bits and pieces of her land that bordered up against the Muttontown Preserve to Nassau County for the newly formed Muttontown Preserve. And then in 1979, Mrs. Moore placed Chelsea on the National Historic Register herself, making it a national landmark. Part of the land was to be used as a nature center, which was formed the Bill Patterson Nature Center, which is right next door. That was her land. And then the rest of it was to be part of the preserve, to preserve open space, and also to preserve her home. She wanted it to be used for decorative arts, events, different things like that. She really wanted to make sure that her home was safe.
Chelsea Mansion is open to the public today as a Nassau County park, museum, and event venue.
What was wonderful was that it was handed down to us by the owner. It wasn't a school, it wasn't owned by the military. Chelsea was literally handed to us by the family upon Mrs. Moore's death. So the house had never been altered. According to Linda Post, she says, "My mother finished the house in 1930 and placed a bell jar over the house. And the house stood sort of in time. It got stuck in time. And the world changed around it, but Chelsea stayed the same. And Mrs. Moore ran Chelsea like a grand house up until the day she died. There were 12 live-in servants, a butler, a chauffeur. She lived in her grand life here at the house. And then upon her death, the house was in great shape. We did have a small period of time where it needed some work, but now Nassau County executive has really put forth a great effort into restoring the mansion.
As a county park and museum, Chelsea Mansion today continues to offer visitors a glimpse into the lavish and luxurious lifestyle of Long Island's historic Gold Coast mansions. In Muttontown, Chris Collora reporting.